back to the Valley to Peak Nutrition Podcast. It is just me this week with a couple of hopefully helpful but kind of quick hitting things that will be relevant to you during this time of the year as we look at Thanksgiving coming up here towards the end of the week, plus some information about the first and only sale that we have ever done. This is actually pretty exciting to me because I remember as we were first starting Valley to Peak, we didn't have any, quote unquote digital products to offer, but I thought, man, it would be cool to have something where I could just, discount the pants off of it and, people could take advantage of something that I feel like is already at a really low cost that would really trim it even more. And so it's cool to be able to do that. And so we'll tell you more about that towards the end of this podcast. Hopefully you'll stick around for everything in between, but if you're just interested in that, then definitely feel free to fast forward my ramblings about this other stuff, which I think will still be helpful, but fast forward this, check out that, decide if you're interested or not. That will be going live, of course, on Black Friday and going for I don't know how long. So first is a reminder of something that we do every year called Operation Net Zero. This used to be a standalone contest that we did for people who were kind of friends of Valley to Peak and who had been following us for a long time, and it actually grew to be fairly big, so big that I didn't feel like I could really put the energy that I needed to put into that, as well as to the clients that are in Valley to Peak and just some of the other obligations that I've got. So we don't run that as a formal program, but we do keep it internal still, and we do still send out all of the different resources that are involved with that to our current clients. That basically begins at the end of October and then will end essentially January 1. What's most relevant to you, I hope, or most helpful to you, I hope, is we did a podcast on this, kind of an abbreviated version, a couple of years ago, and it still lives in the podcast archive. So if you're interested in listening to that, if you're curious, like whether or not you've got any desire or goal that is performance driven or is driven by some sort of a big trip that you've got coming up that has to do with the outdoors, or whether it's day-to-day life, or whether it's weight loss or whatever. If you've ever just wondered, is there any possible way that I can enjoy the holidays while managing to mitigate some of the extra stuff that comes with that, weight gain or bad habits or whatever, right? Then I would encourage you just to check it out, listen to it. They're all very short. They're all very simple. They're all very, what I feel like is practical. And I will link that podcast in the show notes, so you've got a direct link to it. Or you can search on your podcast platform. You can search on the podcast heading in our website for Operation Net Zero, and it should take you right to it if you're interested in learning more about that or seeing what that is. One question that we get a ton is on fueling from endurance activity. Now, historically, people have always been familiar with some sort of a carbohydrate-based drink for fueling during activity, and it used to be that was pretty limited to Gatorade and Powerade and a few other really small different brands. Those offerings have grown a ton in the last several years to now you still have all of those. Gatorade has an endurance formula that's higher in sodium. You've got more expensive product called Tailwind. You've got Scratch Labs coming out with different things. BPN, Bear Performance Nutrition, has product. I mean, there are a plethora of different options when it comes to endurance fueling and calories, carbohydrates, etc., that you can take in when you're doing some of these things that are, lasting more than an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, potentially all day. Sometimes it's multi-day events. What's interesting, though, and one of the things that has changed, and one of the ways that a lot of these companies try to differentiate themselves, is by suggesting that they use varying amounts of different ingredients to get some sort of a proprietary blend that's unique to their brand. Now, what that means is they are essentially using different types of carbohydrates that they suggest absorb or digest at different rates. And sometimes those rates are faster. And so the theory goes, my brand, our proprietary ingredient mix digests faster than X, Y, and Z brand, therefore provides you better fuel over the workout or over the endurance run that you're doing, which is why you should choose our product. Now, there is some truth to that, but I would say by and large, there's not a whole lot different among these different brands, right? They're all going to provide some fuel. One of the kind of newer kids on the block in this, though, one of the newer ingredients that people have been asking a lot about is something called cyclic dextrin, or highly branched cyclic dextrin, sometimes abbreviated HBCD. We hear words like glucose or fructose or just carbs or fast digesting carbs, and that's pretty familiar to us. But this one, for the most part, is new. And so one of the things that I've tried to do more this year and will continue to try to do is just to give really brief overviews of some of these. So we did one on creatine back in October. This one will be on cyclic dextrin, and we'll keep, reviewing the different ones that come out over the next several weeks. Now, obviously, the first thing that I think is important to do with something like this is just to define, what is it for people who maybe aren't familiar with it. Cyclic dextrin is a type of carbohydrate that is made from cornstarch. Now, here's what makes it a little bit different than some of the other ingredients that I had mentioned before. Although it is a carbohydrate, the claim to fame with cyclic dextrin, and one of the ways that brands that use this are trying to set themselves apart is this is a slower digesting fast carbohydrate. Now, let me kind of break down what that means, and you can decide, whether or not you feel like there's any truth or whether or not it's worth going to get for you. Although it is a, quote, slow digesting carbohydrate because it's made from a starch, it still is absorbed fast enough without upsetting the stomach to where it can be used as a fuel source during some of these endurance activities. Now, if you're not familiar with the difference between the digestion rates of fast carbohydrates versus slow carbohydrates, it would be good to know the difference there. And this is one of the topics we cover in our Foundations Plus course, which will be on sale for Black Friday. Just a little plug there. Slow digesting carbohydrates are generally derived from starches, things like bread, potatoes, corn, etc. Fast digesting carbohydrates are generally derived from things that process much faster, sugar, honey, etc. So it comes from a starch, but it digests faster than what we might think of as brown rice, let's say. That's a little bit of a slower digesting carbohydrate. So that's thing number one to know, is that the claim to fame here in layman's terms is this: since it's made from a starch, it's going to process a lot slower. Therefore, it should deliver energy smoother to you rather than spiking your blood sugar and dropping it immediately after, as some people will claim some sugars do. We're going to come back to that statement in a little bit. Even though it's a starch, and even though it breaks down a lot slower, it's a type of starch that breaks down fast enough to give you the type of fuel that you would need on an endurance run. So is that true? Yes, it is. It is true. Now, the question you've always got to ask yourself is, does that really matter, though, at the end of the day? Part of this, and this is number two, is that since it's slower digesting, it supposedly releases energy more evenly over a longer period of time than something that is predominantly found from a sugar. A couple of the other claims to fame are pretty much, you read these as people tout them, and they're kind of like, duh, of course. One of them is it enhances exercise performance, and one of them is it quickly replenishes your glycogen stores. Well, of course it does. Any carbohydrate that you take in during activity is designed to do that. So, there really is no points given on that one. Now, The third thing, and maybe the most important argument here, is that it's going to cause minimal stomach problems. One of the problems many people often mention when they're taking in some of these simple sugars from Tailwind or from Gatorade or from any of these other products is that it's so much carbohydrate, it's so much sugar at once that the stomach literally can't take it all in at once. And so it starts to cause people to have some belly aches. Because this process is slower, some people will say this tends to sit easier on my stomach. So obviously that's going to be something that you're going to need to play with to see if there's any actual difference there that you may notice between having something that is, quote unquote, slower to digest than a sugar like one of these Cyclic Dextrins. Now, the part that I keep saying, oh, we're going to come back to this and we've got to revisit it, is what they keep saying is that because it processes slower, you tend to get a smaller rise in your blood sugar, and therefore you don't get these big lulls or dips in your energy midway through a workout. So you've got to ask yourself, okay, is that necessarily true? We don't necessarily see that as long as a person is active. So when you research this and you compare two groups, one group is resting and sitting behind a desk. One group is active and doing some sort of an activity for, call it 2 or 3 hours. You could say it's cycling. You could say it's hiking uphill. You could say it's running. You could say it's swimming, something active beyond just walking on a treadmill, right? So you've got two groups. One group is resting. One group is active. Remember that when we encourage you to use these, and when we encourage you to use gummy bears, and when we encourage you to use some of these fast-acting carbohydrates, is always the latter when you're active. Keep that in mind. Back to the two groups. So group one, we give a carbohydrate load to from one of these sugar-based drinks. What happens? Blood sugar peaks. It rises very quickly at about 30 minutes, and within 1 hour, it drops and leaves you with a feeling of low energy. You see the same type of reaction in insulin. Every time you have a rise in blood sugar, you have a rise in insulin. The insulin is designed to be a transporter for that carbohydrate into your muscle. It's like a car transporter transporting a new Tesla to the dealership. It rides on the back of the car transporter. Once it gets to the dealership, it delivers it. Insulin is designed to do the same thing for your blood sugar. Go to the group who's active. We give the same dose to the group who is now active, and we see nothing. It is fairly flat. You don't see some massive peak and massive drop. You see a very blunted response. It goes from looking like a mountain in the group that is at rest to a little bitty hill in the group that is active. You see the same response from insulin. So what's the premise here? The premise is the activity portion. When you're active, your body responds different to sugars. So is cyclic dextrin better than using one of these fast digesting carbohydrates like are in most of these traditional sports drinks? The answer to that, at least from a scientific standpoint, is not necessarily no. Now, does it sit better with you? Do you personally notice something different? Maybe. And that's where, again, just like we said with creatine, and like I'll say with most supplements, if you're questioning and you're curious about it, unless there is just a blatant and obvious no, this is not effective, then try it. See if you feel better on one versus the other. But at the end of the day, we are saying this. If you are taking in with some regularity some carbohydrate on endurance events, you are going to see an improvement in performance. Doesn't matter if it's cyclic dextrin, doesn't matter if it's potatoes you've made at home, doesn't matter if it's instant mashed potatoes like I've used before, doesn't matter if it's one of these more expensive or one of these dirt cheap, sugar-based electrolyte type of drinks. As long as you're taking in some fuel, it's going to enhance performance. It's going to fill back up those muscle stores that you're using during activity, and that's going to allow you to continue on during the exercise and reach whatever it is, the goal that you're trying to reach. So hopefully that helps explain some of the background behind cyclic dextrin. and why it's used in place of some of these simple sugars, and whether or not you want to go down that hole and trying it or not. Second question that we had, does strength training equal more fat loss? And you have to look at this through the lens of two different things, and that's how I'm going to answer it. The first lens is through, does strength training cost you more calories than cardio? Right? So basically that's what this person was asking. Am I burning more calories by doing strength training and weightlifting than I am during cardio? If I've got 30 minutes, should I lift or should I get on the elliptical? The second thing that I'm going to answer is from a more prolonged perspective. All right. So going back to number one, is strength training more effective at burning calories than cardio? Not necessarily. We find that on average, a person is using about 6 calories per minute when doing strength training, including the rest that they do between sets. Strength train for an hour, you're looking at roughly 360 calories, which is meh whenever you're talking about, expenditure. You just have to take that into account. Any type of activity that is, zone 2, zone 3, nasal breathing, I'm not absolutely hammering myself, but this also isn't just a casual walk type of pace. You're, on average burning 10 calories you're on average burning 10 calories per minute and something like that. Now, take that with a very loose grain of salt. These are very loose estimates. Those are not factual. Don't try to mathify your energy expenditure with this. We had a podcast on this a while ago, and depending on the intensity, depending on how well trained a person is, there's a lot of variables that go into that. But it's to say this: you expend fewer calories via resistance training or weightlifting, including rest, than you do with cardio. That's number one, okay? That's just like what we're talking about in general. So you're comparing 360 calories per hour versus 600 calories per hour. There's an obvious difference there. However, and this is part two, what you do not get from cardio is you do not get the type of muscle adaptation that you get with resistance training. And that is very important for a couple of reasons. One of the number one reasons why is this: if you have more muscle mass, regardless of total body weight, if you carry more muscle mass, you will have a higher metabolism. That will mean that you will undoubtedly expend more calories during your day, and it will either A, help with weight loss if that is the goal and you're in a deficit, or B, allow weight maintenance to be much easier because your total calorie needs are a lot higher because you carry more muscle mass. The second part of that is this: in most situations, I'm not casting this net too broad, but I'm trying to keep it simple. In most situations, when you finish a, mediocre, average, call it zone 2, fairly easy, but not overly easy, but not overly challenging cardio-based workout, the expenditure essentially stops. There's not a lot of calories needed by the body to recover from something like that because it was fairly marginal from a difficulty standpoint. When you finish a resistance training program, there is a lot of calories needed to recover that muscle in the hours that follow that activity. Some people have suggested even as many as 24 hours or more, your body is needing calories to recover the muscle from what was done during the resistance training program. A big caveat to that, though, is we are assuming you are following a program that is consistently challenging you. You're not just going in and doing the same sets of 3, reps of 10, same chest and bi day, back and tries. Like, you're not doing the same program. There is something that is, causing the body and forcing the body into new challenges and new adaptations that the body has to adjust to, which of course requires calories for overall recovery. So this question is not as straightforward as yes or no, because in my opinion, you have to take into account the long-term play of this. It sounds really great to say cardio burns more in the moment, but does it really when you think about the long-term play? I think both are effective, but from my philosophy with training, and not just mine, this is kind of universal, training has to be specific. So you have to think about what it is that you personally want to improve. If you're training for something, you're training for a big trip, doing a bunch of weightlifting with no buildup of cardiovascular endurance, with no, smaller sessions of intensity sprinkled in there, is probably not going to prepare you the way that it should. Likewise, if you're just after overall general health, then you may not need 3 and 4 hour training sessions at Zone 2 with these more challenging, higher intensity intervals sprinkled in there as well. So you've always got to gear it towards what it is that you want. But the long and short of it is this: both of them provide value, and you need to find what that balance is based on the amount of time that you have to give to it, because the most practical program that you can follow and execute with consistency is always going to beat whatever the optimal program is that you've got written on paper but can never execute because it's not practical from a time requirement standpoint. So there's always a lot to think about there, and it's never as meets the eye. All right, so drum roll for the Black Friday sale. This is the first sale that we've ever done. It's the only sale that we will do. Everything in our digital products category, or whatever you want to call it, will be 50% off. And so everything on there is, for the most part, $10. That makes it all $5. We will discount our course as well. So the Foundations Plus course, which will start January 2025, will be discounted by $100. And that is the biggest sale and the only sale that we will do. So if you are interested in that, you can enroll. There are limited number of spots, and you will save $100 right from the get-go if you go ahead and you enroll now. So I will link the page in the show notes that will take you directly there. You can sign up. You can see everything that's there. We've got a ton of resources on there that are all aimed at hopefully helping to educate you so that you learn more about nutrition. We don't have any interest in just like telling people, hey, go follow this and you'll see success. My whole goal is that you understand how it works, because when you know how it works, you're far more likely for long-term success than just something that's short-lived. So hope this has been helpful. Hope the 2 topics have been helpful. Hope you can find the Operation Net Zero, if you're interested in checking that out, to be helpful as well. As always, if you've got any questions, you can email us at info@v2pnutrition.com. Be glad to answer those, or put it on for one of the podcast questions and answers, and we would do it there. Have a great Thanksgiving. Thank you guys for listening all year long, and we'll be back again in another couple of weeks with a new episode.